Hey there, folks. Welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture, and it's time for the year-end list. And the one that's always the most popular, the top 10 worst hit songs of 2022. It's difficult to place the mainstream charts of 2022 in context. On the one hand, a lot of hay is made every year about how broken the Hot 100 is, myself included, especially in a year where holiday songs occupy nearly 5% of that year-end list, to say nothing of extended holdovers from 2021. It leaves you feeling that there's just less to work with, courtesy of the months where the charts didn't really move all that much, and thus saw an extended crossover with a goddamn Disney movie. In other words, a lot like 2014, just with more album bombs. But also like 2014, I'm not as quick to call this year a complete disaster. Make no mistake, for some genres like mainstream pop and rap and trap, it was pretty rough, as radio traction often proved to be a deciding factor whether songs lasted beyond their streaming window, especially if they came on an album bomb, and that wound up screwing over some very promising releases. And unfortunately, the radio dragged even harder, letting songs from years past stagnate on the Hot 100 long past their expiration date, while being rather unwilling to list and platform really anything in a timely manner. For a very brutal example, Heat Waves by Glass Animals, first dropped in 2020, was one of my worst hit songs of 2021, and it was the biggest hit song for the year-end Hot 100 for 2022. If I'm at Billboard, that is a massive red flag that the inertia of the existing system might not exactly reflect the timely taste and consuming habits of the audience. But the bad songs don't really make me as angry as they have in the past. This is not 2016, or even bring up much of the deep-seated embarrassment or deep-seated revulsion like the last 2 years. The good songs, they also weren't always that consistently good. We'll get to that in the next list. But when I look at what actually wound up on the list in 2022, the most consistent emotion is dumbfounded amazement. The sort of, wow, this is what radio call-out scores and TikTok virality actually gave us this year. A lot of shambling disasters that would almost be fascinating if they didn't give me a goddamn splitting headache. And while I originally struggled with the whole thought, look, this is what the public wanted in 2022. It's never going to personally align with your taste. Just get the hell over yourself. I also remembered that oftentimes said public relies on what they are given, what they're told is available, what they're told is popular. They're not what they're going to go choose and seek out. And industry machinations play more of a role in what actually gets popular these days. And yes, while this has always been true, they're also getting all the more informed and smarter with their marketing and promo plans, better disguising it too, and Billboard can be agonizingly slow to closing those loopholes and respond to the changing times. Just keep all that in mind. Now, what this means is that this list was actually pretty draining to assemble. It might not surprise many of you who watch Billboard Breakdown, but there were some shifts that I can tell will draw some ire. As per usual, the songs here had to be selected from tracks that debuted on the year-end Hot 100 in 2022. Yes, I know, in some cases that might mean there's less to choose from properly, and I should really probably revise this rule to be more representative of the hits or give me a better selection of songs to work with. But really, that's just trying to change the lens of what I want to be more representative of popular music, give me more content, good or bad. And in the spirit of sticking with a consistently broken system, let's start off with our dishonorable mentions.
Bitch, I could be a fantasy. I could tell you got big, deep energy. It ain't too many niggas that can handle me, but I might let you try it off the Hennessy.
I think some are going to be surprised that this is only here. I know a lot of pop music fans who hate this way more than I do, thanks to the lazy sample and the very obvious rip-off energy and whatever Dr. Luke contributed to this. And the crowbarred remix with Mariah Carey and DJ Khaled, they hate that even more. And maybe if I was stuck hearing this on the radio constantly, I might agree, but this was the sort of stiff, awkward, fidgety song that isn't remotely sexy, or can convey any tangible big dick energy as it openly rips off Doja Cat and Megan Thee Stallion, but ultimately it's also way too hollow and disposable to be worth any real energy at all. It's not the first song on this list that can't make its bland softcore remotely compelling, and while the goopy synths don't help, I've actually never been all that fond of this sample, even when Mariah used it originally. clarity? Let's be real, the larger problem seems to be with Latto, with a lot of basic flows, weak punchlines, and nowhere near the personality to make this work. It just falls really flat. Or rather, flaccid.
I've wasted on you all of this time and all of this money, all of these sorries I don't owe you, honey.
I hated this song nearly 2 years ago when I reviewed Dangerous the double album, and while I get how the muddy trap country might contribute to Morgan and Wallen's alcohol-soaked misery, it almost succeeds too well in sounding like a manosphere garbage fire that's not written by Mitchell Tenpenny or Jason Aldean. But what throws me is that this song seems to start off with some brighter guitar tones before diving into shambling, washed-out ugliness, before we hear Morgan Wallen start bitching about the girl who wasted all of his time and all of his money, where it's very telling that he gives us no real details about this girl, or the relationship, or even the breakup. It's not even incredibly bitter or angry. It's just a boring wallow for someone who blew the majority of his sympathy the past couple of years and doesn't really seem like he's changing all that much. In other words, I think this song needs therapy. Next.
All the hours spent giving advice on how to write your songs. All you did was prove me wrong when you said you loved me. Well, you must have had your fingers crossed.
So I debated whether it would be this track or Boyfriend by Dove Cameron in the slot, the latter of which is a lot messier in the disastrously produced attempt at Riverdale core. But you know what, that's at least hilariously bad, whereas I grew to dislike this as a minor hit for another obvious ripoff, this time very much chasing Olivia Rodrigo and Driver's License, but with a very weak central metaphor and a drippy, angry theatricality that's also not remotely convincing. Now, Driver's License made the breakup at its core feel huge, opening up a doorway to so many complicated possibilities as Olivia Rodrigo grows up, whereas this, it feels like high school melodrama that thinks it's a lot more significant and dramatic than it is. Do you think that the angry pettiness of the song and Lauren Spencer Smith venting would be backed by something beyond this limp acoustic guitar, flat synths, and the fake snap? I mean, it's not even organic or charmingly lo-fi, it's amateurish, and it relies on a conceit where they might as well made a pinky swear. Now, I know some folks will say that I'm clearly too old for this, but I can also appreciate teenage angst when it's done well. And this isn't it. I should not have had to learn so much about U.S. college football to follow the Hot 100 this year, but Walker Hayes pulled out a second hit where he references Alabama and Nick Saban, and it feels just as corny and stale as the rest of the sitcom-level humor of this song. It's not worse than Fancy Like, that would be very hard to do, which is just gross all the way down in some truly mystifying ways, but the production here is considerably worse, with the crummy twang of the guitars, the god-awful vocal mixing, and the painfully cheap-sounding drum machines, where you can very obviously tell that Monument was rushing this out the door to capitalize on the viral success of Fancy Like. More importantly, it's trying to establish Walker Hayes as the basic everyman, where he's trying to keep his daughters off the pole, write some songs that'll get him a little bit of play, ask Morgan Wallen how that's worth keeping him away from the booze, and then try to contain his vices before his wife nags him. I mean, come on, this feels like the truly dumbest elements of Home Improvement mashed into Married with Children, the hapless American dad who just wants what's best for everyone. I mean, come on, this archetype was dead in the water a decade ago, at least. And while there is still an audience that'll chuckle along with this anyway, I mean, even they might deserve better than this. And to end on football, not only did Alabama not make the playoff this year, I know for a fact there's a lot of angry Kansas City Chief fans who blame Walker Hayes for the AFC Championship collapse last year after his massively overblown performance. And while that's not exactly fair, when the song is this bad, I'm not defending you.
Fuck a pigeonhole, I'm a night owl, it's a different mode. I'ma have to make a paint of 6 on a pinky toe. Heard you with a shooting guard, just Just let a nigga know I would have your court side, not the middle row.
But wait, you say, this was the one Drake song from Honestly Nevermind that the public actually seemed to like. Why is it now here? And my reply is, yeah, exactly. The Drake fandom appeared to have standards so low that a lousy repeat of Knife Talk was the only thing they could accept from Drake's house experiment, and it ultimately led to Her Loss, which is comfortably his worst album. We'll deal with the aftermath of that project in 2023, but looking back on this, beyond the fact that including on the album stunk of cowardice and an inability to commit to the concept, it's a bad song, with the feel of two entirely different fragments smashed together, with Drake bitching about fakeness that he's often helped perpetuate over the last decade, and the fact that nobody really tells him like it is to him. You know, it's kind of funny. After this summer, we should ask Anthony Fantano how well you take someone saying something, Drake. And 21's verse is not that special either. The standard array of gunplay and sleaze alongside the already dated Will Smith line. But the couplet that really stands out to me here is where, back to back, he calls his gun a sexual predator for how many folks he's hit with it, and he snaps back at a girl for asking questions whether she thinks she's Nadeska. You know, a music journalist from even in the days when people actually cared about everyday struggle, who has received constant and really vicious disrespect. And coupled with what was coming on Her Loss, what Jimmy Cooks reveals are two men who want to call themselves out. Hey, they want to be called out, but they can't actually handle it. Very telling.
Take my hand, let me make you mine. I'm through waiting, taking my time. Never felt like this before. Take my name and make it yours.
Oh god, I can't even get that angry at Parmalee. This is hacked out, basic, utterly forgettable until you realize that it's produced like shit with the fake snap, the underpowered trap elements, and the rest of the instrumentals stolen from Kane Brown back in 2018. But look, this is a proposal song for Hallmark original movies that eventually wind up forgotten in the bowels of Netflix. And while it is clingy and rushed and kind of has some weird lines, what does Forever on Your Lips really taste like, Parmalee? It is just such a wildly dumb swing at sincerity that it's kind of hard for me to hate with any degree of intensity. I mean, this band's hit-making career the past few years, it honestly might be more punishment than anything I could say. Let's just forget this exists.
She likes it when I pour tequila, cause she knows that we about to have ourselves a little night. When I play John Denver through that little Bose speaker and her eyes start dimming those lights.
And you know, speaking of white bread boyfriend country, this one just kind of baffles me. It only made the year-end list thanks to Music Row giving this a bafflingly long run on Nashville radio, and I feel like a lot of notes got mixed up for this between your usual Dan and Shay sterility and a song that's all about country lovemaking. Because on the one hand, you got two very happily married men, not to each other, that could have actually made this interesting, but they also have no real vocal personality or interplay between them, rattling off lists of things that she likes, that he does, that just feels beyond basic. And the Bose name drop on the hook feels like the cheapest possible commercial plug waiting to happen. But then you've got all the sexual innuendo on the pre-chorus and the hook, with a spare electric guitar and a bass that is so leaden and crushing that it shakes the glassware in my kitchen when I put it on my stereo. I'd call this a torch song, but the guitars just feel way too bright. If anything, it sounds like a demo where someone forgot to properly mix and master this. And there's just something about their mugging, obnoxious delivery where you can tell that they are way more impressed with their attempt at sexuality than they really should be. I mean, I might have started off kind of mystified that this became a thing. Now I'm just kind of embarrassed. And now, on to the list proper, starting off with number 10. So one thing I find a bit interesting, if also a bit nauseating, is the arc of the reputational rehab tour, particularly when it spills into the art. We'll get more into certain elements of this later on this list, but normally the label will advise you present yourself as contrite, take a break to get it right, maybe stick with more sincere moments that can win back hearts and minds and get people to forgive and forget. And in the United States of America, it tends to work, especially if you like the art or the artist beforehand. You tend to have a vested interest in the performance of contrition so everyone can get back to consuming without thinking or any issues. But if the artist never truly goes away, and you can see the mechanism of this arc play out in real time, you start questioning how sincere any of it really is. Especially when they eventually get back and they start making songs like this.
I need something you prove. Something stronger than I'm used to. Yeah, I've been pulling 92 hard to feel like nothing's gonna cut it. That's the hard truth.
Morgan Wallen is at his absolute worst, playing to cavalier, alcohol-soaked bro country leftovers. This has always been true, and what it reminds me of is the slew of overly obnoxious breakup songs that those acts would shovel out around 2013 and 2014. These guys always tended to be better at the hookup than the breakup. And in a way, it is the natural extension of Wasted on You, but for me it's considerably worse. The brittle acoustics, the fake snap, the keening pedal steel that gets suffocated by the bass and the synthetic vocal echo as the trap percussion slides in. But what's worse here is that there's no sense of melancholy or sadness. This is just a standard barroom commiseration that only works if you actually want to extend sympathy to Morgan Wallen, who wants a high enough percentage of alcohol to forget you. So not only are some of the underlying issues behind Wallen's behavior not remotely resolved, I don't really buy that he's changed. He's now kind of leaning into it for a bizarrely major key song. It's the tone issues that get to me. And with one of Morgan Wallen's weaker performances, this is cheap, Sam Hunt-esque filler that nevertheless became another hit. The disinterest in actually changing feels palpable, and it's more than a little gross. Next. Number 9. I'm going to make a contentious assertion. There are some artists where some people are way more enamored in protecting what the artist represents than any of their actual art. And as a critic, it's kind of a lose-lose situation, because you want to talk about the art, but you're kind of talking past the audience. It's really more about what the artist validates for them rather than anything they actually say or do with any competency. And you speaking against the artist feels like an attack upon them. And I feel obligated to say that there's actually not that many of these artists. Normally it's reserved for acts with a lot more personality than talent, and a laundry list of transgressions that wind up overshadowing it all. But when they have a song that winds up becoming one of the biggest hits of this year...
Damn, I knew you were tripping. We could have been superstars. Remember when we were jacking cars? Now it's not safe for you. You switch like a pussy little bit.
I am so tired about talking about Kodak Black, because it's rarely actually about anything he says or does on record that's remotely interesting or good. And it's not just the response from the fans that back this up. It's a large part of why he was actually on Kendrick Lamar's Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers this year, to highlight the odd kinship where a lot of rappers see their darkest impulses in him and how they could potentially be redeemed. Now, I could question why so many are eager to extend friendship and clout or even a pass to a violent convicted sex offender who can't seem to stop getting caught up in his bullshit. But despite them constantly bringing him up and elevating him, you are considered the killjoy if you actually broach that conversation or threaten his reinforced platform, because then you're threatening theirs as well. So fine, I'll keep it on the art. I'll play it your way. The chipmunk vocal sample got on my nerves in record time. The trap percussion is stale. There are multiple bad poop references on the hook and verses, and he talks about taking fake perks, which is a good way to get, at best, the worst trip of your life, and at worst, a surprise OD. And then by the second verse, he's dropping ableist slurs. And keep in mind, he's not framing himself as a villain, but as a martyr, a troubled anti-hero constantly in his own redemption arc, because he knows that's essential for any flimsy justification to defend him and everything he does. Whereas with this crap and Gremlins in general, I prefer a little sunlight. Number 8. The fastest way to date yourself as a content creator is to critique the slang of the kids. I mean, you immediately come across as old and out of touch, and what does it even matter? It's slang. Yours was garbage too. Just let them have this. I mean, it's generally the same attitude that I'd usually take towards memes when I'm on the outside looking in, but I can also tell when somebody's forcing it by now, and nowhere in 2022 was it more obvious than this.
pointers in the paddock in my piece. I'm pushing P. Cop new helmets for my piece. We don't want no peace. Got a spot across the spot, just for peace. Drop the data, now we plotting.
I remember so many people making it such a big deal early in 2022 when Gunna beat The Weeknd in album sales going head to head, which was dispiriting and overlooks a lot of factors surrounding the rollouts of both artists and where they're at in their careers, such as Gunna being one of the most disposable rising stars of recent memory, whose monotonous flow and empty brand name porn actually seems to spin around and become something of a meme for how unbelievably boring he is. I guess that's why he's now interesting. But the problem is that ironic meme hypebeast consumption is still consumption, and thus Pushin' P became a thing in 2022 with the watery synths, the bargain barrel trap percussion, and one of the most forced attempts at creating slang that sounds cool in recent memory. You can't even argue that it's from the kids. These guys are my age or older, but okay, fine. Put aside the regurgitated brand names or Young Thug saying that he fucked a cup of water. Again, not really a case of being as sexy as he thinks it is, unless she's a waterbender down there or something. And then Future's line, she's not a lesbian, for Future she turned pesbian, but ultimately it's all about P, not that kind. Now what does it mean? Well, basically anything you want it to be for the easy rhyme, and while the toilet humor could just spill forth, the larger truth is that P means product. Cheap, disposable hype that as soon as Gunna falls off, you're gonna forget this exists. Even in the context of gym playlists and clubs, this got rotated out fast, and I can't say I blame them. Number 7. So I don't tend to crack down on rip-offs that often. They're all over the charts any given year. Sometimes they wind up making good music on the established template or sound. And while you might want to wish for more originality, sometimes great craftsmanship will make up for it. I only really get that annoyed when you can tell that they're years late to the bandwagon, or they're looking for a very cheap formula to get a hit really bad and then kind of miss the original point altogether.
But I ain't worried about it right now. Keeping dreams alive. 1999 heroes. I ain't worried about it right now. Swimming in the floods, dancing on the clouds below. I ain't worried about it.
You know, a colleague of mine once said that OneRepublic is a band you either like or you don't care about, which is why the long-running vanity project of Ryan Tedder in 2022, they aren't trying to sound like whatever the hell OneRepublic was in the mid to late 2000s, just instead rip off Feel It Still by Portugal the Man from 2017 for some extremely obvious commercial core. So, for all of Ryan Tedder's increasingly squawky falsetto alongside the whistles, the guitars that are smothered in reverb, and a flair that has none of the idiosyncratic charm that kind of made Feel It Still at least somewhat novel, not really surprising because this is a tacked-on soundtrack hit for the newest Top Gun movie, and this wouldn't be fit to lick Danger Zone's boots, but that's arguably not really what pissed me off the most with this song. No. That comes with the lyrics and the tone. Feel It Still, because there was something kind of off about the weird, surrealist swing of the thing, it leaned into that grooviness. Whereas I Ain't Worried also acknowledges that time is running out, and you're broke, and you're scared, and you're desperate. And that's still mostly echoed in the minor key melodic progression, but the song wants to dive into this willful delusion instead. A nostalgia trip where I kept expecting something to diffuse the tension or lean outright into darkness, but that would actually require taking chances that nobody involved here actually had the balls to make. It's trying to induce a lot of carefree thrill seeking, but let's be real, it comes across like this fake painted smile in the middle of the uncanny valley. And for really an underpowered advertisement, it's still a total failure of a comeback that nobody wanted. Let's move on. Number 6. So the next two songs here, I mean, they shouldn't surprise anyone that they're here, although I can imagine that some might be surprised that they are this low, especially after the rant that I went on when I reviewed this track. Because remember when I mentioned Riverdale Core? Yeah, here's the much larger specimen. Time for an exorcism.
Mom it up, oh, daddy's getting hot at the body shop, doing something unholy. He's sat back while she's dropping it. She be popping it, yeah, she put it down slowly.
What I think frustrates me most about Unholy is how obviously it could have worked. Make Sam Smith a more active participant in the narrative instead of just the stage master. Sideline Kim Petras entirely for, well, obvious reasons given everything that she says on social media, but also find someone who can actually match Sam Smith's brand of theatrical vamping. Hell, you know what? Get Hosier on board opposite Sam Smith, and if you listen faintly in the distance, you hear a whole swath of Tumblr just swoon. Or hell, just do what everyone else does when they remix this song and rip out the clanking disaster and attempt at groove for something with an actual tempo and some sinuous energy. Lean more into goth rock or dark wave. That's ultimately the reason why this is not higher on this list. The song is an overproduced theatrical disaster that, again, isn't nearly as sexy as it thinks it is, and really just wishes that it was sacrilege by the Yeah Yeah Yeahs. But you know what? The potential's at least there. I kind of wanted this to work. Now, the original's still atrocious. There's no chemistry, the production elements clash awkwardly, the dramatic buildup is poorly sold, and it all feels really rushed. But there is a part of me that hears Sam Smith making more songs like this on that upcoming album, and I think, you know what? With the right producer, they could probably pull this off. Maybe? So, yeah. I still think this is pretty awful. I'm actually kind of amazed the radio got on board. But hey, at least they were trying. Unlike number 5. I will freely admit that a lot of my experience with this particular subgenre of hip-hop has been kind of from the outside looking in. I've heard a lot from the UK, New York, and Chicago scenes, but often given the accompanying violence and the subsequent political stigmatization and crackdowns on the genre, it feels like a lot of the potential mainstream crossovers burn out before they get any traction. This was not one of those cases, and yet for the reasons why, kind of make you wish that it could have been.
Pull up the single turn up. Yeah. Pull up the single turn up.
Alright, you're gonna have to follow with me on the waves of suck around this song. It starts off with an abbreviated cover of Bruno Mars's Talking to the Moon, one of his very earliest ballads from Doo-Wops and Hooligans, and a pretty damn good one, but since this cover was done by the UK singer-songwriter Sam Tompkins, his bargain barrel willowy croon strips away the song of any R&B or soul flavor. But since drill often grabs in samples like this and then drops a bunch of stock stuttering but hammering percussion all over it, we get the UK drill rapper JNR Choi, who had an album last year that had no hype whatsoever, but does his wannabe Pop Smoke impression all over this, and then the song goes viral based off the phrase "to the moon" being a common catchphrase in the crypto scene. So much so that the single cover is a screenshot of Elon Musk tweeting it. Now, all these would be reasons to dislike the song, but when you factor in how it's a painfully sterile drill beat, and how JNR Choi doesn't really acquit himself well at all, for all the most part, it's a sex song where he is screwing this girl doggy style from behind and then sprays all over himself, and thus, naturally, this got an American remix, with 504 and Gunna delivering more bland garbage. So let's make this clear. The only reason this became a thing was because of a bad cover, a worse remix, and a goddamn crypto meme perpetuated by the most insecure emerald fail son imaginable. And given the downward trajectory of crypto and Elon Musk right now, it's less Apollo 11, more Apollo 1, or 13. Worthless. Number 4. I've said before that the fastest way to wind up high on one of these lists is to disappoint me. And yet here, I didn't expect to say it with the lead artist, given my messy and complicated opinions on his work for years now, but I have to. Post Malone? I expected better of you.
Girl, I like you, I do. I wanna be a friend, go shopping in a Benz. I like you, I do. I hit you in a leg, can you fit me in your plans?
Of course, the argument with this song is whether it was something that Post Malone wanted to make at all. Given the notoriously troubled production and promotion behind 12 Karat Toothache, I had the suspicion that the label would want to find the most pop-friendly song with the biggest name guest star and push it however they possibly could. But after One Right Now with The Weeknd underperformed and Cooped Up with Roddy Ricch outright bombed, they took the surest bet possible with the worst goddamn song on the entire album. The one that sounds like Post Malone bought it from tired songwriters, and they delivered his laziest possible performance. But somehow, it actually doesn't stop there. The incessant squeak that's lodged into the percussion that gives me a headache every time. Post Malone saying that he's about to pull some other guy's girl like a hammy before pleading desperately that the girl he's talking about stay along with the plea that he fit into her plans, and it sounds like he's texting a groupie before the tour bus pulls in. And then there's Doja Cat, and while I could go off about how the more the industry wants her to become that all-purpose pop, rap, R&B diva, the less interesting her music gets, you can tell that when she cares to rap her ass off or sound more sensual, it can work. This somehow delivers neither, where she has no chemistry with Post Malone, and in the most baffling line, now he got me on a leash cause he said no strings. I mean, what sort of bafflingly bad attempt at kink is this? How are you, of all people, so bad at this? So naturally, thanks to the radio, this became one of the biggest hits that both artists had in all of 2022, and it is one of their worst. I don't like this. I'm not happy, in case you can't tell. Number 3. So I remember back in 2017, Imagine Dragons released Believer, and folks were so shocked at how in-your-face and aggressively obnoxious the song seemed to be. A load of hollow shrieking that barely even tried to make sense. I also remember a lot of people being really surprised that it didn't actually wind up making my worst hits of that year. And you look, I'm not going to say the song is good, it isn't, but when it got featured in the season 1 finale of Riverdale, soundtracking a sex scene between Archie and Veronica, spoilers. I'm not kidding about any of that. It's wild. Look, I was laughing way too hard to wind up hating the song. But fast forward to late last year, and all that antipathy folks felt back then, yeah, I get it now.
Oh, the misery. Everybody wants to be my enemy. Spare the sympathy. Everybody wants to be my enemy.
So honest question, why does the radio still play Imagine Dragons? I know this band has more aggressively commodified their sound than few else in this era, but their disastrous compositions, the howling delivery, and the genre pileup of atrocity of production almost makes it feel like they are daring someone, anyone, to try and stop them. Better question, why hasn't anyone? In this case, we have a song that was explicitly tied to a cartoon theme song for the TV show based on League of Legends, all about alienation, but can't credibly sell anger, but absolutely delivers a bunch of jerky, grooveless, melodramatic whinging. And maybe it's just me, but if you're trying to sell an empowerment fantasy to preferably kids or teenagers, it can come across as unbelievably sour to lean on a powder keg of resentment and paranoid victimhood, especially coming from the pop monoculture staples Imagine Dragons. And look, it absolutely breaks my heart to see JID on this. The Forever Story was one of the best albums of 2022, and Jid's presence nearly saved this song. Until you realize he's basically here because Dan Reynolds can't afford to get Kendrick Lamar anymore, and with how a lot of his hook is just smashed back in without any real transition after Jid's verse, it shows a distressing lack of regard for any of what he brought. Structurally, the song just feels wrong. Hell, pile on the warping, painfully fake-sounding production from Matman and Robin. They were the ones who dropped that faux bro-step-esque synth. And then you realize that if this was made by anyone who didn't have Imagine Dragons clout or connections, it would have bombed spectacularly and honestly anonymously. Nobody would have been anyone's enemy. So, this might have turned out to be a self-fulfilling prophecy. And yet, why do I feel like we were the ones who lost in the end? Number 2. So I mentioned near the very start that in the opening months of the year, the charts seemed to kind of stall out. Especially on the radio, where especially in the top 10, it got stagnant fast. And it wasn't like new music wasn't being released. Maybe the mainstream might have been a little bit slower after 2 years of plague, but this would have been a time for the programmers to take a chance. Your industry is dying, and if you won't rotate in any of the new pop songs from the weekend for thoroughly stupid reasons in the United States, I don't know, maybe try something outside the box? Even just go looking? Instead, backed up by the fact that certain kids' songs get inordinate traffic on streaming platforms thanks to distressed parents just leaving the soundtrack on repeat, they took the safe option, and we got this.
Fresh like a drip, drip, drip that'll never stop. Whoa. Pressure that'll tip, tip, tip till you just go pop.
Oh god. Look, I didn't like Encanto. The plot is messy, the musical numbers feel awkwardly positioned among too many characters, and you know what, I could go off at length surrounding some of the themes and the moralism and the conclusion. Look, I get to how some target audiences, it might have a lot of emotional resonance, I understand their point, but the overwritten tangle of the movie with the questionable themes and the weird refusal to spark any desperate conflict while escalating all the internal tension really prevented me from connecting to it at all. Yes, I know this is how real-life family drama often materializes, but if you're gonna play that card and lean so hard on cheery forgiveness and sentimentality for the conclusion that doesn't feel all that earned, your dramatic stakes are gonna feel kind of askew. It's not gonna work. And would you look at that? In microcosm, that is this song. Jessica Darrow plays a character with all that strain on her shoulders, and you can hear the anxiety constantly ramping out, but there's no outlet. It's, again, forcing a smile, but never allowing that scream of proper frustration. Not the first song on this list where instead of actually meeting the tension, there's endless deflection, and it just feels so much worse in the end. But then there's the execution. Jessica Darrow cannot sing well in this register. The tempo shifts feel incredibly sloppy. The production is weedy, inorganic, painfully unbalanced. You'd think they'd try to go for something that actually fits the setting, the time period of this movie, rather than this creaking, very cheaply produced mess. And then there's Lin-Manuel Miranda's writing. I think it's very telling that he's actually described this as inspired by an older sister, given that he was the baby of the family. The song comes across as observing how one deals with pressure rather than actually living with the real experience. But with his overwritten, increasingly forced rhymes, they make this song impossible to hear as anyone but him behind it, being entirely too clever. And that doesn't help anyone embody a unique character, certainly not one who would internalize thoughts in these cadences. And even for those who experience that sort of pressure, that sort of anxiety, that I get, beyond that initial pop of relatability, what's gained from a song this cloying, this badly executed, to constantly hammer on that nerve? Because, let's be real, this became a hit because of frustrated and desperate parents needing something to distract the kids that are sick at home with Omicron, and the radio taking the safest possible option to follow behind it. At least we don't talk about Bruno somehow going to number one had some flair to it. Talking about pressure, this needs a wrecking ball. And finally, number one. I've talked a lot on this list surrounding how these songs became hits. A lot of this is speculation, I'll admit, but tracking the charts over the course of years does give you way too much perspective surrounding how the sausage gets made. And for a lot of folks, it doesn't really matter, be the music good or bad. But I've also referenced artists on this list where you can tell the popular reputation, it's way more important than any actual music that serves as the vehicle. All the more important when it actually comes to protecting or redeeming said reputation. And thus, at the epicenter of all this noxious, cynical plotting, where I'm just openly questioning whether or not it was all worth it in the very end.
Oh, there's two things that you're gonna find out. They don't love you and they only love you right now. If I was smarter, I'd have stayed my eyes on and leave them Broadway girls alone.
This feels gross. And not just the experience of listening to this trash fire of a collaboration that served as a major launchpad to ensuring Morgan Wallen had mainstream traction yet again, and Lil Durk thoroughly embarrassing himself as the tokenized voice. Yes, he wasn't forced to do this. He did include this song on his album this year, but let's be real, it's for the streaming numbers. Don't be stupid. And when I heard this song, all I could really hear was the favor being exchanged between labels, giving Lil Durk a crossover that he's really struggled to attain in comparison with peers like Polo G, and a bit of reputational rehab for Morgan Wallen. It's cynical and disgusting, sure, but I get the business. Dusting off the old marketing plan because the trap country seeds, they were planted all across Dangerous the double album, so why leave the potential disease fruit rotting on the vine? But unfortunately, I can't stop thinking about that because otherwise I'd be stuck focusing on this song and it's atrocious. Morgan Wallen possibly delivers his worst ever vocal delivery. He's already got no chemistry with Lil Durk, but how does his yowling vocal fry have to sound so badly tracked and muddy in the mix? And that doesn't even match Lil Durk's pickup at all. And the mix, it is a slurry of guitars drizzled over the cheap sounding trap percussion. I mean, there are competent industry veteran producers and engineers who worked on this song. It should not sound this bad. But then there's the content. I've already described Morgan Wallen at his absolute worst when he's embracing the whole douchey runoff of bro country, and this is square in that territory. A hectoring rant about the girls of the Broadway strip in Nashville. The girls, I might add, who seem a little bit alienated by a lot of his bullshit when he meets them at Jason Aldean's bar, because of course it is, and has to take away their phones in order to party with him. And some of the reference points are just bizarre here. Lil Durk mentions that this girl is into Pink and not rap music. I could go off on a whole digression about Pink's connections to black music, but that's different. But Pink's also never been a country artist. But what's more telling is that Morgan Wallen did give this girl his number at the start of the song. And the entire sentiment is that these girls are dishonest and they won't respond to a phone number by some guy at a bar. Dude, isn't this your scene? You cannot be so goddamn aggrieved that she will not text you in the morning when she doesn't seem that interested. But again, nobody really cares that this song blows this hard, or that Lil Durk is even here. He might be considered the voice, but it's getting co-opted for the purpose of muscling Morgan Wallen back into the mainstream, where it's increasingly getting revealed that if you're unrepentant, following in the wake of Jason Aldean, you will get more than enough, a big enough audience who will appreciate you for not changing, not apologizing, not growing at all. And the douche bro attitude of the song only feeds into that vibe. And I'm sorry, it stops being about separating the art from the artist or any sort of subjective notion of forgiveness. This is about power and what it reveals about everyone involved. That's why it's my worst hit song of 2022. It might have worked for what it's trying to do, but it's rotten all the way down. And unfortunately, we're not going to be able to leave it all alone. That's the problem. But yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. I know ends on a sour note and not really a triumphant note coming out of this, but hey, we got better lists coming. Please, if you want to sit around, like, subscribe, drop your own list in the comments below. I'd be happy to see it. Beyond that, though, anything else I'm able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. If you guys want to help support the channel, I got merch linked down in the description below. Or if you want to get into argue with me on my Discord or get albums on my schedule for next year, link to my Patreon is right over there. Don't feel obligated. Tough times over the holidays, I understand, but the options are available. Till then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.